So I hope it's not sacrilegious to say this, but I thought about the words of Jesus last night when he came to the Last Supper, and he knew what that Last Supper meant. But it was when he was turning over the kingdom, the keys of the kingdom to his disciples. And he says, with great fervency have I longed to be here with you. And I guess that's my heart here as I look at what I want to share with you this morning. I've given you a lot of information, a lot of facts, and biblical precedent for why I want to share with you this morning what I have found for myself to be a personal path to victory, and hopefully give you some signposts for you guys as you walk with it from here. But I want to start by looking at a few verses from Daniel. And it's a very familiar passage. You don't have to turn to it if you want to, but I want to think about this. You know, Daniel was a young man who was taken out of a safe culture. Safe, in parentheses, out of the Jewish culture and placed into a pagan one, where he was surrounded by the temptations and the technologies of his day. Nebuchadnezzar's hanging gardens were one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. There was a lot of things that were taking place there. And yet Daniel noticed that there was one area where he could become defiled. We don't find that any record where he was tempted by idolatry. His three friends were with Nebuchadnezzar's statue. We don't find him being tempted with women like Joseph was when he was in Egypt. We don't find that happening. We don't find him being tempted with any of their pagan practices or doing anything like that. He saw one weak spot. And it says in Daniel chapter 1, verse 8 says, and Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with a portion of the king's delicacies, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the chief of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Daniel saw where the weakness lay. And he did 2 things. He purposed in his heart. You know, and that's where we come to a place of decision where you have to look at it and say, you know what, I know that there's a line needs drawn here. And Daniel drew a line saying, I will not defile myself. And that was the first step. The second step was, I have to find a way to still live in life. And he went and he sought. He sought counsel. He made an appeal. How can I live without defiling myself? He sought another way. And that's where really, I just want to keep reminding ourselves of that. As we have looked at various different types of technology this week, we looked at scriptures behind them and what that might be saying to us. Has the Lord poked you at an area of your life? Has the Lord maybe laid a finger on your heart that says, you know, have you considered how you're using this here? Have you considered what influence this is having on your heart? You know, we are all at the place of Daniel. We all realize that there's a place in our heart where we are tempted to be defiled with the king's meat, with the meats of this world. What do we do with that? Where do we go with that in the long term? Will we purpose in our hearts, as Daniel did, to change? Or will we instead kind of shrug it off and kind of say, well, that was pretty good, but I'm not there yet. We'll see what the rest of life has to bring. Where do you think we'll end up? Remember what I started at the beginning. What's our end game? Where are we going? And are we willing to draw the lines needed to get there? Let me ask you, which of those responses do you think the enemy wants us to take? And our choice will indicate who we listen to. So I asked you this question yesterday: what church do you want to belong to? And I'm going to elaborate this about this a little more, but I just want to hear your feedback real quickly. Which church would you rather belong to? Do you have any clues? There's benefits to both. Okay, I'll flesh it out a little bit, then we go a little more. If you take a train track, they are able to haul incredible amounts of weight over long periods or long distances of ground very, very quickly. I say very quickly in ratio to other things. You know, most of the oil that is transported in the United States is still transported by rail cars, not trucks. It's transported by rail cars or pipelines now as they're starting to build them. Why? Because it's the safest mode of transportation that they have. However, how many of you have a trail or have a train track ending at your garage? A train track is a very incredibly heavy, it takes time, it takes effort to put it in there, and it's very rigid. You can't just pick it up and move it. It takes a lot of work to keep it there and keep it in good repair. And that's where I think the theology comes in sometimes, that there's some things that need to be unmovable. They need to be rigid and set in place because God doesn't change. But the reality is, as our world changes around us, we need to be able to adapt to the changing influences and yet still keep our eyes on the goal. I was over in Thailand and I was down in Haiti. Those are the only two countries out of the U.S. other than Canada. Does that count? That I've been to. And it's interesting. Lines over there are mere suggestions. And down in Haiti, there are no lines. It's you go wherever there's an opening in the traffic. And if you get in front of someone else, you hope they stop and you honk your horn to tell them to stop. You know, it's a pretty wild. It's crazy. But what's interesting in Haiti, it takes an incredible amount of time to go any short distance because there is no uniform set of travel. When they created our roads, they give you a line down the middle of almost every single road that's here. You get into Pennsylvania, they're just still back in horse and buggy days. No, just kidding. There's a lot of their roads are too narrow that if you put a line in the middle, you can't keep your truck on one side or the other. You take your half out of the 2/3 on the right. You know, it's just the way it is. What is the purpose of the line in the middle of the road?
Keep cars from crashing into each other.
Okay, to keep cars on your side so you don't crash into them. Okay, it's for safety that way. It's also to give you a target, something you keep your eye on. How many of you keep your eyes on the guardrail when you're going around the corner? If you keep your eyes on the guardrail, you're going to end up in the guardrail. But when you keep your eyes, when you're turning, you keep your eyes on the inside line and you're gauging your car's direction by that. And this is where it comes in. Do we have our purpose laid out clearly of where we're going? And that's where I think it's good for us to step back and say, where are we going? Where have been some of these things? I mean, technology that we had was not around when I was 25 years old, when I was your age. I did not have a cell phone. Actually, I got my first cell phone when I was actually I was about 23, 24. It was a big brick phone, about that big. You could call numbers. You could store 10 numbers in it. I paid about $1 a minute for my phone. And it timed you, and it rolled. Every 30 seconds, it would jump ahead. So at 31 seconds, it dinged you for a minute. You know, but the technology that we're facing today, I would have had no clue how to handle back there. And so it might take a while for us to be able to build a train track that we know that is exactly the safe way to go through here, but can we quickly pave a road? Can we quickly put a line down the middle and say, there's a safe place here, aim for this? And then guardrails. What are guardrails there for?
Keep you from going off the edge.
Keep you from going off the edge. Are they meant to just tuck your shoulder, your car up against and go the whole way around You might look like you came from West Virginia or northern Minnesota if that happens. But no, that's not what they're intended for. What are they there for? They're to catch people who aren't paying attention to the center of the road. Okay? And so that's where I think we need to have a goal of where we go and a guardrail for when we slip. And that's where I feel it's very, very important for us to keep that in mind as we draw some of these things. Technology is going to change. You young people, if the Lord tarries, are going to see things that are foreign to me. You'll be giving these talks 25, 30 years from now. And will you have the end game, the end vision view to keep it going from there? Does that make sense? Okay, I'd like to talk about this. What do you say should be the standards, let me ask you about it. What is accountability supposed to be? Is accountability supposed to be a way to catch people? Or a safety net for building trust? Which one?
Safety net.
A safety net. Why do we say that? How would that result in a different response? Who's responsible here for accountability? The person who's needing the accountability or the person who's giving accountability? Who's responsible here?
Give.
It's the person who, the older person, let's just use that illustration. The older person who's supervising a younger person. It's his responsibility to catch them. Okay? Whose responsibility is here? It's the one who's asking for accountability, right? And I want to build trust up in the person I'm with. And so I remember my dad, when I talked to him about this, I said, well, so-and-so, they never checked in on me. That's why I kept falling. And my dad said, wait a minute. Whose responsibility is it to confess when something goes wrong? And I have found accountability for me only works when I say, if I fall, I will come and talk to you. The weight's on me. The weight's on me to do what I know is right. Because that's where repentance comes in. You know, if there was someone I was responsible to for quite a period of time for accountability, and I hated even checking the accountability report because I knew I was going to probably find something there that was going to be wrong, and then I have to go approach them. Oh yeah, I kind of slipped up there. I said, why didn't you come and tell me? Well, I didn't really want to. What does that tell me about their heart? Do they really want accountability? No, they want the comfort of saying I'm accountable without actually being accountable. Does that make sense? And so it's a big thing, I think, for us to remember when we're part of a church, we're not there as a brotherhood that everyone's just trying to look at each other and see where they're crossing the line. Hey, stop it over there. And how many of you have ever been part of a church like that? That is a miserable brotherhood to be there. But now, if you're part of a brotherhood where someone stands up during testimony time and says, you know what, I struggled this past week. And I was not victorious like I should have been. But praise God, I want to get up and I want to go on. Can you guys pray for me? What happens in that brotherhood? See, that's the one that bonds together. And that's how it goes. That's the way we're going to be successful in it. I want to look at, I realize that this is not necessarily a church setting. When I teach the young people, I make all the young men bishops and all the young ladies bishops advisors. I used to one time I made bishops' wives, and they said, oh, who am I married to? Let's not go there at Bible school. But I wanted to ask him, if you were responsible for charting a safe path forward for your congregation, where would you draw these lines? See, it's easy for us to kick at the lines other people draw. But when we're in the position of responsibility where that God has called some of us to be, we have to address this. And my goal this week has not been to draw railroad tracks and say, if you're outside these tracks, you're lost. That's not my place to be. But in your homes and in your churches, God has given the responsibility to your parents and your church leaders to try and help navigate this way through here in as best way as possible. And so I see 4 different church responses to the use of technology. The first one is just say no. Just say no. We're not going to have that. And what oftentimes happens is there's no teaching about it. It's bad. We're not going to do that. Period. Now, is there a place to take a hard stand on some things? Yes, absolutely. There needs to be some things we do this. But I believe it is so important that if we have to take a hard stand, we give the reasons why. Why are we drawing this line? Why do we draw the lines at no movies or no animated films? Why do we say that? Is there a reason we do that? But the problem is, a lot of people who have grown up in this environment, they get exposed to it sometime or other. They go start working at a job somewhere, and all of a sudden, like my whole point of sale system is completely online. Because that's all they're making anymore. And so they come start working for me, and all of a sudden, there's internet in my store. If they have not had any introduction or any explanation about why we don't do some of the things we do, how well equipped will they be when they get exposed to it out there in the world? Will they know why we don't do that? The second principle is just focus on biblical principles. We're not going to draw any lines. Everyone does what's right in their own eyes. And we're back to Judges, the last verse of Judges. And everyone did what was right in their eyes. How many of us would want to live in a culture and in a church like that? You start reading through Judges, it's a black, dark time. Praise God we don't have to, but that's where we go. If we just simply put the principle out there and hopefully everyone adjusts it, where are we going to be at? I had a lady come into my store that she had, I hope I can say this, she had a skirt that wasn't hardly long enough to be called a skirt. And she had a top that wasn't even really big enough to be called a top. And she was absolutely convinced that she was modest. What happened? There's no definition of modesty, so we can make it whatever we want. Right? And so if we just focus on biblical principle, we're going to end up in a place we never fully intended to be. The other one is a pass, and this is what churches have oftentimes done. You know what? I don't know how to address this from a church standpoint. We're going to let it up to the individual families. Our churches are a reflection of our homes, correct? They said that. As goes the home, so goes the church. As goes the church, so goes the community. And that's very much true. And this is the burden I have as I talk to us parents. Are we parents taking this seriously enough? You know, you as parents may, I don't know what your congregation situation is, you may have to draw a line that is different than what some of the other people in your church are drawing. There's no shame in that. But seek it out, search it out, and communicate your heart to your children. My one son, when I was talking with him one time, I said, son, I just don't have a good feeling about that. He said, why don't you have a good feeling? I said, I don't know, but there's an unrest in my heart. There's a lack of peace in my heart if we do that. And he says, okay, I can accept that. For you just say, no, we're not going to do it, was very hard for him to accept. But when he knew that there's a deep, unsettled peace in his father's heart, he came to the place where he was willing to trust that. But the question I ask this is, if we just pass this way, what happens if you have 1 or 2 or 3 families that don't care about this at all? What influence does that have on our body? What influence will you have on the body if there's other people that are trying to stand strong and we just go free for all? We have within us the ability to fall apart. And the third is to accept, or the fourth is to accept slowly, but with guidelines and accountability. This is the recognizing, especially as we're looking at technology, this is recognizing that there is a need for some technology to be used in our home, in our churches. So how do we be slow about accepting it? Because the question is, what's the impact that this is going to have on our church? The impact of the phone on the home has been huge. And it's not all bad, but it has changed us. You look back at what the impact of the TV had on the homes of the people that were here. They never showed TVs in their homes.
No, this is one of the first times they did. They actually had church TVs in church 2 years later to watch that.
Where are those people who brought that technology into it? Where's it going? And so that's why I say, be cautious. When something new comes out, I'm a geek. I'm a nerd. No, a nerd is a geek who has bad social skills. So maybe I am a nerd. I don't know. But I'm a geek that does it. And so when new things come out, it's kind of like, ooh, you know. And I have tools at home that my children sometimes call them toys because I don't use them very often, but they are tools, you know, because they're neat. You know, it's amazing some of the things that you can have out there. But be careful about that. It took a long time. Our church finally decided to build a website here about, it's just over 4 years ago, 4.5 years ago. We did not realize that COVID was coming. But our question was, how do we let our community know that we're here? Years ago, it was the Yellow Pages. How many of you even know what the Yellow Pages are? Okay, good. Okay, I'm not so archaic. Do you guys still get phone books? We haven't gotten a phone book in Bemidji for 6 years, 8 years.
We still get it.
Really? Okay, must be good to be in the sticks. No. Anyways,
That's probably why.
that's probably why. And we looked at it and we said, how are we going to reach the community in their square now? And we looked at it, and I told it earlier, if our live stream ever gets to the place that it becomes a crutch for people not to come to church, that's too high a price. We'll cut it off. But that's where we were very slow about adapting it. But that's how we got to the place that we are. And what's interesting is we've had numerous people in the community that have found that website, and they said, we had no idea there's a Mennonite church here. Can we come visit? What do we have to dress like? You know, and they had lots of questions and things like that. But it's interesting, as we also have our statement of faith up there. People have said, I read your statement of faith. I can't go there yet. That's fine. We're being upfront. Okay, so where do we draw the line? I want you to read this. By the way, I have, from here on, I have all of the slides, all the text put onto some papers. Bill let me copy them up here, so that I have about 25 of them printed up here. If you want to pick one up afterwards, you're welcome to. Where do we draw the line? And this is what I want to say. If we feel that any habit or pursuit, think about this in technology, harmless in itself, is keeping us from God and sinking us deeper into the things of this earth, if we find that the things which others can do with impunity, or with seemingly without any negative results, are for us the occasion of falling, then abstinence is our only course. And I wish I could just sit here and talk about this, but the reality is that there is parts of us that must die. And there's things that, I remember my mom, for me, when I was growing up, when I was 14, 15, music was a huge thing. And I like Southern gospel. But Southern gospel, for me, was at that time a very short segue, especially the modern Southern gospel, a very short segue into Christian country, and Christian country was a very short segue into regular country. And I wish I could go back and I could erase all those songs in my head that I still remember. I'd go through Menards and all of a sudden I could sing that song word for word. It's an influence. And it came to the point I had to say, you know what, I have to draw the line here for me, because I don't want to go there. My goal is there. I can't be distracted by this stuff here. And so this line is going to be different for each one of you. But just because I can't draw a uniform line that we all fit in does not mean that you are exempt from the responsibility of drawing a line for yourself. We must draw a line. If we have just principle, we're going to be all over the map and we're never going to get there. But if we start putting it into practice, we will be able to get through this. And so I'd like to start by looking at a personal path to victory. And I'm hoping that these are some of the guidelines that I have found to be very useful, and I'm hoping they can help you as well too, as you draw some guidelines for your success in relating to technology. Number one is recognize where the battle lies. Galatians 6, 7, 8 says, "Be not deceived. God is not mocked. Whatever you sow, that is what you will reap." And it's a very foundational. We can all recite that passage, but the reality is, whatever you feed is going to be the harvest that you get. If we feed on junk, why should we be surprised when our lives end up there? And so, there's a phrase in there that I don't think we oftentimes take take enough importance of. God is not mocked. We may think that we can sow this here, but we're going to reap it over here. God says, if that happens, my whole principles are a mockery. Because it's dualism, it's hypocrisy. God is not mocked. Whatever you sow, that will you also reap. If we sow to the flesh, we will of the flesh reap corruption. But if you sow to the Spirit, you shall of the Spirit reap life everlasting. And so as we look at our use of technology, what is in there that is sowing to our flesh? Where does the battle line? Where is that? For some of us, the line may be with games, others with music, others with social media. For some of us, it's the line of time. We may not be doing anything necessarily really wrong on it. But are we wasting the time that we have? Wherever you find that place where your flesh is called by God's Spirit, the places where God may have spoken to you this week, wherever that line is, that's where the battle is. And that's where the devil's going to get at. Whatever controls or influences me wrongly, that's the battleground. And that's what's so important. Do we recognize where the battleground is? And this is where it's going to take honesty on our parts. Are we sincere? Do we have integrity before God that if He touches our heart and says, I'm concerned about what you're doing here, that we're willing to say, yes, Lord, I need to change. So if we are honest about where the battleground is, then the next step is confess it as wrong to a brother or sister and ask God for a changed heart. I talked about this yesterday, but I'm going to say this is an absolutely vital step. If we skip this step, we will be powerless in achieving a victory. And not just over technology. It's over anything. I already quoted that verse in James 5, verse 16. Confess your faults to one another and pray for one another that you may be healed. The effectual fervent prayer of a righteous man availeth much. And there's times that we are very weak and we need that. But there's another verse that stands out to me so much as well about this. If you read in Revelation chapter 12, it talks about the dragon that comes down. He makes war against the children of God. And I don't know about you, but when you hear about the devil being cast out of heaven, and he makes war against the saints, do you realize that that's talking about us right now? That we're in a war. And the prize is your soul. That's the battle. That's where we're at. But it says they overcame him. How did they overcome him? There's two things that happened in order for them to overcome the evil one. What was the first one? They overcame him by the blood of the Lamb. God's blood is the only one that's going to be able to cleanse your heart and change it. And it wasn't when I was struggling with moral purity until I asked God, I don't care what it takes, I want my heart pure. I don't care what price I have to pay. I want my heart cleaned by you. Lord, can you cleanse my heart with your blood you shed on Calvary? And I did that privately for a while. But the victory didn't last very long. And it's just something the Lord showed me in the last 3 or 4 years, because what's the second part? He overcame by the blood of the Lamb, and what's the second one? The word of their testimony. You know what testimony is? Is when we speak up about what God is doing in our lives. When we speak up about what's in there. Because as long as it's in our head, the devil can just beat you over the head with it. You fell like this before. You're going to fall like this again. You're never going to be strong enough to make this. But when we speak it out, Lord, I want you. And we go to our brothers and sisters and we say, God is speaking in my heart. I want to change. All of a sudden, the chains of doing it on your own are gone. You have a rallying around of your brotherhood. You have the ability of other people to step alongside of you. And it is so much stronger. And it was only when I was willing to do that I found victory over the things that so long had been that besetting sin. The power we have when we speak up is huge. And I would encourage you, as many of you as have testimony times in your church service, we deliberately chose to have a time where we have testimony and prayer. And sometimes that lasts 5 minutes, sometimes that lasts 25 minutes. Why? Because God's moving in people's hearts. And I have watched as different people that have struggled and fallen, struggled and fallen, struggled and fallen, and then they finally speak up in church and say, I need help. I'm asking God to change my heart. Can you pray with me that God would change my heart? All of a sudden they started growing. And they started finding victory in places they never had before. So then that's the goal. We're looking for a personal path to victory. The third step that I see is to form a band of brothers. Much strength comes from unity of purpose. And I'm going to give an illustration here of another church that I was at one time, and I heard of a group of men, and that's somewhere where this thing came from. That I heard of a group of men that they got together for just some time of personal accountability. I don't think any of them really knew what the others were facing as far as deep personal struggles, but they came together and they had a commitment that they were going to be absolutely open and transparent with each other. And they're going to talk about these things candidly. And as a way of forming together as a band of brothers so they can maybe find victory together that they weren't able to find on their own. And they did it so much, and I got to keep moving on. Because if you don't have accountability, if you don't have that transparency, then trust is not there. And having a core group that you don't trust each other, you're never going to get very far. It's going to be like a marriage where there's no trust in there. It doesn't work. And what really astounded me is that they weren't just accountable to each other. They were united, both in the joy and in the pain. And I asked, what happens if one brother stumbles or falls? And they said, well, they have an accountability jar, or a consequence jar. And the consequence jar for these group of men were things, I think these were some of them, I forget because I've heard of several of these now, so I might have gotten some things mixed up. They would have to deep clean every bathroom in the home by themselves, no help from their wife. Guess who had to do the deep cleaning? The one who fell? Or all of them? It was all of them. They did it together. They stood together, even when it was hard. They had things like you spend the night on the garage floor with nothing but a blanket and a pillow. You know, if you know that your brothers love you so much that if you stumble and fall, that they're going to suffer with you, what kind of love is that? That's a love that balances that ball clearly on the top, because it's something that transcends our flesh. It's brotherhood. And that's what I'm saying. And the other thing that is so important to me about this is that there's so many times the devil tells you, when you're sitting in revival meetings, you're sitting somewhere and God asks you to speak up and to stand up or something like that. No, Lord, I'm going to surrender to you and I'm going to do this between you and me alone. How many of you have done that? How many of you have found that didn't last very long? But what's interesting is when you find a group of people that are going the same direction that you can pull with, all of a sudden, God's there. Remember what he said, where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name. And when we come together saying, Lord, we want more of you in our lives, and we've joined together so that we can follow you more effectively. I don't care if you're playing cornhole in the yard. I don't care if you're sitting around having a Bible study. God's there. He's building that relationship when our focus is there to be there so we can serve him better. It forms a union that is incredibly strong. And my burden is that as our churches, some of our churches are quite large, You know, how many of you, if you spent 3 or 4 minutes talking to each person, how many of you could talk to all the other men in your church before everyone leaves? If your church is small. Could you do that? If you spent 3 or 4 minutes with each man, could you talk to all the men in the church? Beth, you're funny. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. She knows. When you're a small group, when you're a small body, you're close. But as our churches get bigger, There needs to be that closeness somewhere, and you can't have that closeness with 40 men. You're going to have to form a band of brothers to do this. Are you going in the same direction? And the fourth thing is, you need to paint some lines. You need to build some guardrails. And that's what the rest of my slides here is going to give some suggestions as we look at technology on how to paint some lines and how to build some guardrails. Again, I'm not telling you this is exactly where you have to do it. But I'm asking you, you've heard my heart, you've heard the scriptures. Where is God telling you to do it? And when you paint the lines, you build guardrails, I think there's 4 basic areas that we need to be looking at. We look at our time. We look at our content of what we're using our tech and our devices for. We look at our location. Is there some places that are safer to use than others? And then we look at our devices. Are there some devices that are not worth it? So let's look at these quickly here and closing. Lines and guardrails, looking at our time. I would encourage you, and this is where the Band of Brothers is going to come in so handy, but if you don't have a Band of Brothers and you're still at home, your parents are good resources for this. I don't know anyone who loves you more than your parents do. You may not feel it always, you may wonder sometimes, but I guarantee you, there's nobody loves your parents more than you and that wants your well-being more than you. Talk to them. To create a principal plan with that. What do you feel is the proper amount of time for me to be spending on my devices? What do you think is a proper amount of time that you would like to see as a family not be on our devices and together? But I would say do this and make sure you have consequences in there. Why? That's the guardrail. Our goal is to not be on our phone too much. The guardrail is to catch us when we go past. So you can do things like, if you go over your time limit one day, you have to subtract that from your time the next day. If you go over 2 days in a row, you go on a fast for 3 days. I'm just giving you ideas. Be creative. Look at that. Where is God speaking to your heart? What would you do? If you have a smartphone, and it's newer than about 6 years old, you have an app tracker that tells you how much time you spend on your apps, on which apps. Did you know that? Some people do, some people don't. That's okay. But look at it. It's called, and what's interesting is that our world gets it. They actually call it digital well-being. They know that people are addicted to this. They know that there's some things, and so some people have, ding, 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 you've been on YouTube too long, get off. Why? It's the world's way of trying to deal with that. And I'll tell you right now, if I'm only doing it because of the world's view, it's hard to hold to it. But if I'm doing it because I know my Heavenly Father wants a relationship with me, and He's calling me to set this aside so that I can spend more time on Him and the things that He has placed in my life, it's a whole lot easier to hold to that line. Okay? Oh, here's some other ideas. I mean, if you don't know how much time you're spending on your devices, this is the app tracker is very, very helpful, and it's often very enlightening. I talked to one person and I said, "How much time are you spending on your phone?" And they said, "Too much." And I said, "Do you know how much it is?" "No, and I don't want to know." We found out later, that it was between 8 to 12 hours a day. This was an adult with children. That's sobering. And I don't think they ever got to that place by saying, you know what, this is what I'm going to do. It was that addiction that just slowly kept growing. And no line was ever drawn. Another suggestion I would have is say no screen time before such and such a.m. Why? Well, I used to say, I'm not going to get on my phone at all until I have my devotions, my personal devotions. Good call. Except when you want to be on your phone, how long are your devotions? Or you read 2 verses into it, and all of a sudden, who buzzed me? You know what I'm saying? I'm just being candid with you. This is where I've been at, and this is where I'm looking at. Look at drawing some of those lines. Have an evening cutoff time that enables time to be with the people in your home. This is one of the ones my son was saying to me, "Papa, you said you're not going to be on your phone after 7 o'clock. Ooh. And my children, they were saying, Papa, can you play with us? Can you do this or that? And I got to write this email. Oh, I got to order that for the store tomorrow. The excuses are never ending. Just be honest, it's right there. Are you going to do that? The last thing I would strongly encourage you to do is do a fast regularly. Go without your phone for a day. 24 hours. At least 24 hours. So if you put it in the cupboard at nighttime, don't get it out until the whole following day and the next morning. It's amazing how often we find ourselves, oh, we can't do that. And it's amazing how it clears your mind to be able to absorb things because we're not so distracted. Building some lines and guardrails on our time. Let's look at our content. This is the stuff that we get, that we consume. Like we said, the medium is the message, but you're still absorbing the info, the message of what you get through that. So look at this. Before you click on any link, ask this question: who does this enthrone in my life? Who does this enthrone in my life? Does this enthrone more of the Spirit of God in my life, or does this sink me deeper into my own flesh and my own passions and cravings? It's huge when we start looking at that from that perspective, because we find we're clicking on things sometimes without even thinking about it, and then we end up at a place we never intended to go. There are certain weather stations or weather websites I will not go to anymore. The Weather Channel is one of them. They have too many scantily clad women trying to just gyrate or whatever to get your attention to look at some ad. And that's one place I've just chosen not to go. Because there's something that's feeding a side of my flesh that doesn't need to be fed. I think that if we were to ask this question and were to honestly answer it, I think it would cut out probably about 70% of what we spend online. Guys, that we read the news, is it wrong to read news? This was one that God hit me. Is it wrong to read news? People's heads must have really got stiff from all the volleyball last night, the answer is no. But the question is, before I click on this story about a school teacher who did something inappropriate with her students, my question is, who does this enthrone in my life? Why do I need to read this story? What's it going to do to my mental mind? What's it going to do to my spiritual purity? Because there's so many times we can be reading those things, and when you get done, you feel kind of dirty. Do you know why? Because it is filth. It says back in Ephesians, we read the other morning, we shun even to speak of those things which are done by them in secret. But the world's out there to sensationalize it and to get it's all clickbait. You'll never believe the pictures of Michelle Obama, what she did when she was on her swimming vacation. Click here. It's all clickbait, all to get us to sink our souls a little deeper into the things of darkness. Who does this enthrone in our lives? Delete those apps that cause you to repeatedly fall. I don't know, again, where your line is. I don't know where your battle line is. But I want to tell you this. There are some apps that are prone to do that. I talked about Snapchat a little bit. I know some people, one lady says she has it because all the other girls in her youth group, that's the only app that they use and it's in common, so she wants to be able to communicate with them. And I was kind of like, really? Ouch, but I'm just asking you, if it is something that is a case for repeated falling, whether it being contentment, moral, or everything else like that, delete that. It's not worth it. Turn your safe search on. You all know what that is? Do you know what Safe Search is? Okay, every one of your browsers, Mozilla Firefox, Google Chrome, Edge, if you go into your settings and you go into search settings, you can turn on several different layers of search safety. And what it basically does is it's going to look through and try and weed out things that shouldn't be there. So if you're looking for a recipe that uses chicken breasts, it will weed out a lot of those other ones that pervert that into other ways. Okay? And it just doesn't show them in the search, it just blocks them. Especially when it gets to image searches. Most people don't, I mean, some of the older people don't realize, but when you search Google, you can just click the little tab at the top and says, look for images. And it gives all the images that are linked to that. And trust me, you start searching some of those things.
Where is it at?
Set in your settings, in your browser settings. If you go.
My browser shows, I know what that's at.
Okay. That's a really getting technical, and I can help you, I can show you on your phone later if you want to do that. But a lot of times, especially at our home computers, but on our own, turn on Safe Search. Because all it does is it helps cut some of the things we don't get that image flash across our mind of what it is. Use an ad blocker to help reduce the online ads. I have this. Ad Blocker Plus is something that can be added to all three of those main browsers. And what it does is it blocks usually about 90 to 95% of the ads. So that gyrating woman is usually hidden. But what's happening now is because my local newspaper came here and wanted me to buy ads on our local website, our local newspaper's website. And I said, I'm not interested right now. And I said, because your website doesn't show the ads. And he goes, oh yeah, they do. And so I pulled up my browser and I went to their home page and I said, where's the ads? And he said, oh, there's supposed to be one there, and normally there's one in here, and what browser are you using? I said, the latest edition of Edge. And he says, boy, I don't understand. I said, there's some of your ads I find offensive. And so I have my ad blocker turned on. I don't see the ads. But the advertiser still pays for them. Because he pays per impression. And then he pays a little extra per click. And so, so that's how they do it. And more websites are trying to say, you cannot access this without turning off your ad blocker. And then I have the question, okay, who does this page enthrone? Is it important enough for me to do that and potentially see that? It gives me another step to do that. Use accountability software. And I'm going to say until you've been free for at least 6 months. Now in our home, we require our children under the age of 18 or up until the age when they prove themselves mature enough to handle it. We require them to have both Custodio and Accountable to You on it. Custodio gives us some control to block apps on their phone. So if they were to download something and all of a sudden, how did I get that there? Even though we're not even close by, we could turn that app off and so they couldn't access it. It gives us a little bit more control over the younger children. But Accountable to You simply sits in the background and records every website you go to, everything you type, and it looks for what might be dangerous, and it sends a note to your accountability partner. When I was the lead minister at our church, I said I'm very nervous about being here by myself. And so I said, I put that on my phone and my devices, and I sent the report to all the married men in my church. They got that report every week. And it was good for me because it made me think, do I need to read that? Will that throw a flag? It's good. Real gold fears no fire. Remember that. If you want the Spirit of God to dwell in you, you should not be afraid about what that report should say. If you are afraid, it's a good indication that we need it. Fair enough? Okay. So we looked at time, we looked at content. I also like to look at location. Are there locations? And this is going to come back to when I teach this in Bible school. The very first day, they think that they've gotten the teacher that they've all dreaded because their first assignment is 12 pages long, and they go, no. It's the only 12-page one. Everything else is about a single or maybe sometimes a double page. But, so some of this data I've gotten from them, but what's interesting is I asked the question, is there a place where you find you struggle with your technology more than others? And almost every single one of them has said, yes, they do. Get the phone out of your bedroom and out of your bathroom. Just don't put it there. Well, it's my alarm clock. You know what? Spend $10, go buy an alarm clock. It'll be the best soul-spent dollars of your life. Because when it's right there beside you, and my wife can attest, there's been too many times when I'm waiting for a dispatch for a SAR or something like that my phone's there. You wake up at 3 in the morning and you don't know what to do. Guess what you do? You reach for your phone. If it's not there, you're not tempted by wasting time on it that way. If it's not there, you're not tempted to go places you shouldn't at 10:30 at night when everyone else is sleeping. Don't look at location. Are there locations that are keeping that are causing you to stumble more than others? Because the reality is that we want, when we're struggling with something, we want to keep our sin in the darkness, correct? No, we don't want that being brought to the light. Yet what are we called to be? But now are you children of light. Walk, therefore, as children of light. Bring it to the light. Keep it in the open. We have in our kitchen, we have a cupboard that I put a charging station in there. I think we can charge 8 devices at a time. And they have just the cords, they can just plug them in. And every night before my children go upstairs or downstairs to bed, they go put their devices in there, and that's where they charge. And I'm also keeping my phone out in the living room as well, most nights. There's been some nights when other things are going on too. Keep your computer in a public space, one that's easily spied on. I remember being part of a discussion and someone said, hey, we have to make a decision. We have to choose a safe pattern for what we're going to do in our church for computers. And so we talked about it as men, and the decision was put the computer in a public space that is easily spied upon. It's one of the best things in a family to do, because, you know, if it's off way in a corner in another building or in a back corner of a room, it just opens us up to, or opens our children and us up to temptation to go places and we shouldn't, to do things we shouldn't. So keep it in. It's just a simple way of doing it, and then charge it out of sight and silent. Why? Because if we're looking to break these chains, there has to be a breaking point somewhere. And so if we put them away, it's more easily done. Another line and guardrail is look at our devices. Yes.
A little bit to that last one.
Yes.
The teacher and pastor, don't take it to church, don't take it to class.
Okay. Can we talk about that just a little bit?
Sure.
No condemnation, because I have used my phone as a Bible while I'm here, when I forgot my Bible up in my chapel. But can I ask you, as a general rule of thumb, how many of us use our Bible as our primary Bible in a worship service? Can I see your hands? Okay. Do you find that you're remembering references or scriptures or places to find things easier now, or back when you used a paper version?
Are you asking if we use a real Bible or
I'm sorry, an electronic version. I'm sorry. How many of you use an electronic version primarily during church? Okay, a few of us. And that's fine. I'm not speaking this condemnation. I just want to ask a question. I'm using the same Bible I've had now since I was 21 years old. I've had it rebound. I don't worship this, but it has become something precious to me because it's where I've met God so many times. And I can open up, like I was looking for that verse in Revelation. I knew it was somewhere in here, and I could I knew where it was in the page. I didn't know the reference. I could find it very, very quickly. When I'm using an electronic version, I can't. And the other thing is, if we use it in church, how many of us get notifications during church? What if the preacher is especially boring this morning? Or it's very warm and we're all sleepy? It happens. And so I agree with you. I used to think, well, hey, I can look at the Strong's word of what he's doing. You know what? Write that down on a piece of paper and look it up at home in the afternoon and do a book study with it. Because I have found when I pull out my phone and I look up that word, I miss the next 3 to 5 minutes of what he was saying while I'm trying to think, because, you know, I'm a guy. I can't do 3 things at once. You know, you gals may be able to do that, but I can't. And I find myself that I'm missing what's there, and all of a sudden, oh, how did he get there? And I look over at my wife, what did he say? And she, shh. We're not supposed to whisper in church. So we go to devices. I want to ask a hard question. You do not have to answer this verbally, but I want you to answer it privately. Do you need a smartphone? Do you need a smartphone? The reason I want to give this, I want to tell you about Matthew chapter 5, 29 to 30. And Jesus said, if your eye offends you, pluck it out and cast it from you. For it would be better for you to go into eternity, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, without your eye, handicapped, than to have your body intact and go to hell. And if your hand offend you, cut it off and cast it from you. For it is better for you to go to heaven maimed than to go to hell whole. Was Jesus wanting all of his disciples to go around half blind and handicapped? No. But he was trying to impress upon us how serious this is. Let me ask you this, which is more important to you, your eye or your phone? I wonder what bear would give up for a good eye. And my question is, if there is a device that is causing us to stumble over and over again, why not do with all the inconvenience and whatever that can be to put that away so that I can make sure that I make it to glory? What's your price? Can I do with a little more inconvenience for a purer life? My real question is, what are your values? What do you value most? Do you value most the pure life with God, and if the things that are causing me to repeatedly stumble and fall, that other people seem to be able to use without any degradation of their spiritual character, but for me, I continually fall from them, then I need to be willing to abstain from them completely. That's what God calls us to. Our values are tested when they conflict with our conveniences or easy life. And so I'd like to ask you, what is your game plan? You know, for the world, this is a game. It's a game for the creators of content to see how many people they can snare and get into their devices and using their platform and using all their sorts of things. And for the devil, it's a game to try and see how many of the elect that he can deceive away from God. But brothers and sisters, this is not a game. We play for keeps. When we get to the end of your life, there's not going to be some sort of winners and some sort of losers. You're either going to be on one side or the other. What does your game plan say? Where are you going to draw the line? What is going to be your plan for success? Because I want us all to choose to live to win. I want to see every single one of us around glory, so that the singing we had last night is just a minuscule foretaste of what it's going to be like around God's throne. But that has to be our goal. And that has to define our lines. And that has to build our guardrails. Or we're not going to make it. It's that important. I want to thank you for hearing my heart this week. Last night I was struggling. My stomach wasn't acting real happy last night. I didn't eat breakfast this morning. I didn't eat hardly anything last night for supper. It was just a struggle. I said, Lord, I want to share this. And as I've watched in your eyes, I know that you've connected with me. I know you heard, and I've heard from some of you young people how that God is speaking to you. And I want to thank you for sharing your heart that way. But now the ball is coming back into your court. What are you going to do with it? I can't make those decisions for you. Only God can help you walk away from here. And what will you do? I want to leave you with this. Only let your conduct be worthy of the gospel of Christ, so that whether I come and see you or am absent, that I may hear of your affairs, that you stand fast with one spirit, with one mind, striving together for the faith of the gospel, and not in any way terrified of your adversaries, which is to them a proof of your losses, your perdition, but to you of salvation, and that from God. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, I thank you for your word. Lord, I thank you as we have looked at your word to give us light and give us direction in this whole world that is changing because of the technology around us. Lord, I thank you that you have not left us without guidance, but you've given us your spirit and your truth and your word to guide us in these ways. And Lord, as I have shared my heart with these people, I thank you for the ability we've had to be here and to look at your word together. And Lord, I have shared with them what you've given to me. And Lord, I pray for each one of them as they leave from here. Lord, may you continue to speak to our hearts. May you speak to my heart, Lord, as I still face this battle myself. Lord, I pray that we would choose lines of faith. And Lord, I pray that we would look beyond the conveniences and beyond the glitz and the glitter and the flickering pixels of today, and we look forward to the gold of the New Jerusalem tomorrow. Lord, we have no idea when you're going to come back. But Lord, I pray that each one of us will be one of the 5 virgins that are prepared. That we've looked ahead, we've drawn the lines, and we have chosen you above the things of this flesh. Lord, help us to be faithful. In your name we pray. Amen.